How to create a dashboard in Excel. This is what you're gonna see in today's video. And as you guys can see, whenever I choose here a new option in my slicers, all these three charts is automatically updated for me. The map chart, the column chart, and the bar chart. I can select here any option in my slicers, 2024, 2025, and 2026, and the charts is gonna be automatically updated. And I can also choose here as option products that I have, so creatine, omega-3, and so on and so on. And if I select here a new option, the map and everything else is automatically updated for me. So let's learn step by step from scratch how can you create this dashboard in Excel. We're gonna use 3 different pivot tables to create this dashboard in Excel. We're gonna learn from scratch how can we use a pivot table in Excel to make analysis, to basically slice and dice a data set. We have a large data set and we can break it apart into small parts to create the pivot table. And everything came from a table in Excel. We basically have before a data set, and then we make some changes in the dataset and transform it into this blue table that you are seeing here. If you want to download the dataset, I'm gonna leave the link in the description down below. 100% free, you just click and download it, and then you can follow the step by step with me. So let's find out how can you create this modern looking dashboard here in Excel, step by step from scratch. And let's make it dynamic and interesting like you are seeing here, and that way you can use it into your presentations, into your reports, and so on, so on. So let's go. First step is to understand the data set, to see what we have here, to understand the data, and then we can transform our data into a table itself. But before we do it, let's check what we have here in the data set, and let's check if we need to make some changes in each one of these columns here. So for example, here I have the date, the customer name, the quantity bought, the product name, the unit, the total, the on-time deliver, yes or no, and the state. Here I'm just seeing one column that we need to change. That is the column A, because tell me, what date is that? 45/2/92. It's difficult to know because it's in the wrong formatting, so we need to make it correct. And to make it, I can click here in the column A, and then Home tab, and then I can go here to General. I can click in this down arrow and change to chart date, for example. And here we got the correct format for this date. Another thing that is wrong here that as I can see is the column B and column D, because we have a lot of text within the cell that is, let's say, larger than the actual size of the column. That way we can't read the text for its complete form. So we need to make sure the column is at least the same size as the text, because that way we can read all the text that we have within each one of the cells, each one of the columns. Another thing that is wrong here is the column E and column F, because as we talk about here about values, money, maybe it's a good idea to put it in dollar with this dollar sign here. So we need to change the format. Instead of using numbers, we can use the currency. So with these two columns selected, E and F, I can click here in the Home tab, and then I can click here in this dollar sign. Okay, we're done with these two columns. Now let's make something here. I'm going to select the column A, B, C, D to the column H, and then I'm going to double click in between one column and another. That way we can automatically size the columns. So 1, 2, okay, we're done. Now the last step here is just to make this data set into a table itself, because a table is going to be important when you're going to do the pivot tables itself. So we basically need to have here a table in the data set. So we need to transform the data set into a table. To do it, it's pretty much easy. You just need to click in any cell into your data set, and then you go to Insert, and then you can click here Table. My tables has headers. You tell me. Yes, of course, because you have here date, customer, quantity, all this text here that we have in the first row are headers. And then I'm going to click here, OK, and look what will happen here. We already have a table. And let's say you don't like the blue color or want to change the layout, the design. You can click here in the table design, and then you can select here any type of layout or any type of design, okay? But just to make it clear, it doesn't matter, because it doesn't change the way the table is going to work. And the important thing is create a table, and then we can create the pivot tables. Now, with this first step done, let's move on to the second step, that is the pivot table itself. To create the pivot tables, I can click here in this plus sign to add a new sheet, and then I can right click here and then rename. Here I'm going to give a name, let's say pivot table, or you can type it in analysis and so on, okay? But I'm going to let it as pivot table, for example. Now, let me come back here to data, and let's see. Why is it important to create a pivot table in Excel? Because a pivot table in Excel can help you slice and dice the data. Okay, but and what? So let me give you a practical example. Let's say I ask you this question. What is the total sold? What is the total sold? If you are looking for this, the answer of this question, it might be a little difficult to know because I have a bunch of rows here in my data set, a bunch of columns and a bunch of rows. So to know what is the total sold, I need to add up all the values here in the column F. It's kind of complicated to do it. The pivot table can help us with this. So another practical example. So let's say now I want to be more specific. I want to know the total sold per month, for example. I want to know how much I just have in sales in the January month of 2024. It's more specific yet. So that way the pivot table can help us with these questions. Because if we do it manually here from the table itself, maybe it can take a long time to do it. And let's say another example here. What is the state that have the delivery on time the most? Who just not delays any delivery, for example? We can do it with the pivot table. So this is why it's important to use a pivot table here in Excel, because it can help us to take this large data set and break it into small parts. That way we can make analysis in a more specific way. Let's say that way. To create here a pivot table in Excel, I can click in any cell in my table, and then I can go to Insert, Pivot Table. It's going to pop out here for me a new window, and let's say the table range is correct. This is table 1, that is this blue table that we just created before. And then I'm going to insert my pivot table into an existent worksheet. That is this worksheet right here that we just created before. Location, I'm going to click here in this upper arrow, and then I can come here to the pivot table. And let's say I can click here in the cell A2, for example, or B3 or B7. It doesn't matter, okay? I'm going to click here in the A2 and then down arrow, and then I'm going to click OK. Now we got here our pivot table to the left, and to the right we have our pivot table fields. What is the difference between this that we have here to the left and this one that we have here to the right? Okay, so this one here to the left is the area of your pivot table where you can see the analysis that you're going to do. So for example, you can see each one of the months in each one of the rows, and you can see how much each one of the values have sold, for example. So you can do it, and you can see this result here through your pivot table to the left. And here to the right, you have the pivot table fields. We can see here each one of the columns that we have in the table itself. So let's say you have 10 different columns in your table. You're gonna have here 10 different options. Okay, if you have just two columns in your table, you're gonna have here just 2 options here. So basically here you have your columns, okay? Date, customer, quantity, product, and so on, so on. And here down below you have the fields, basically. So you have filters, columns, rows, and values. Basically, you can take any value that you have just above, and then you can drop here to each one of the fields that you have. So let's say you want to know how much you just sold per month, for example. You can take here the date, click, hold, and drag it to the rows, for example. Okay, now as you guys can see, my pivot table is already working, and I can click, let's say, in this plus sign 2024, and I can see all the quarters, and I can see, let's say, the quarter 2, April, May, and June, and so on, so on. But instead of just see, let's say, the 2024, 2025, 6, see all the quarters, I don't want to have that much of information. I just want to see the months itself. So I can take here the year, click hold, and read it off or drag it off here to the cells. And I can see here that the years are gone. So there's not here anymore. Another thing that I can do, let's say the quarters. I don't want to use the quarters, so I'm going to click hold and drag off. The months, okay, I'm gonna use it. The date, no, I will not use it too, so we're gonna click and drag off here. Okay, so we stick just with the months. And as you guys can check here, we have all the months from January to December. Now to fill in each one of the months that we have here with the values, I can use here the values field. So I can take, let's say, the total sold, this column right here, I can click, drag, and release here in the values field. Okay, now we have here a sum of total. And as you guys can see, now I have the total sold in January month. I have the total sold in, let's say, September month, and so on, so on. So now we have the total sold per month. And our first pivot table is done. Now we can come back here to data and create more pivot tables. But before we do it, it's important you make a question. What are the other types of pivot tables that you can use? What are the other types of informations that you can analyze? So I'm gonna give you a tip. Take a large information, for example, the total sold. It's a big number, it's a large information, the total sold. And then you can break it apart. You can be more specific. So what is the total sold per month? What is the total sold per state? What is the total sold by product, for example? And then you can be more specific yet. So what is the total sold by product by state, for example? What is the total sold per year, per month, per customer, for example? So you can take a large data set, a large value, and then you can start to continue to make it more specific. It's a tip to use to create pivot tables. I always follow this tip and it works pretty well, okay? Let's now create another pivot table, and this time I want you to know, let's say, what is the customers that are the most loyal here to my company, for example. What is the customer that just buy the most? I can do it. It's pretty much simple to do. I'm gonna need to use in my pivot table the column B, where I have all the customers, and of course the column F. Okay, so let me just, or of course, instead of using the column F, if I want you to count the quantity of orders, let's say, I can count anytime that the customer names appear. So I can count here 1, and then 2, 3, I can count Justin 1, and then it's appear here down below again. So it's 2, and so on, so on. I can do it the total orders by customer, or I can also do the customer that just bought the most from a value perspective, okay? So monetary perspective, let's say that way. So let me just click here in the Insert tab, and then Pivot Table. I'm gonna select Existing Worksheet, and then upper arrow, I'm gonna go to Pivot Table, and I'm gonna just put it in to the right of the first pivot table. Down arrow, and then I'm gonna click OK. Now we have our second pivot table, and here, let's say I want to know each one of the customers that I have. So I'm gonna click here in the customers, and I'm gonna release it in a row because I want to see each one of the customers in each one of the rows that I have. Now, instead of just know what is the customer that I just have more orders, I want to see the customer that I just spend the most here with our company. So let's say I'm gonna take the total, click hold, and release here to the values. Okay, that way we have each one of the customers, and I can also see here which customer just spent the most, for example. But let's make something interesting here. Let's sort from the largest value to the smallest one. I can do it, and whenever I just update my dataset, whenever I update my table, this pivot table is going to be automatically sorted again. So I can click here in this down arrow, and then instead of just sort A to Z, for example, because it's going to sort the names, I don't want to sort the names, but I want to sort the values from the largest one to the smallest one. So let me click here again, and then I go to more sort options. Instead of using the ascendant order, I'm going to use descendant order because I want to the largest value be just above and the smallest one be below, underneath. So I'm going to, instead of using customer as my criteria, I'm going to use sum of total, okay? And then I'm going to click OK, and as you guys can see, I just sort from the largest value to the smallest one. That way, anytime that you just insert new data to your pivot table or to your table itself, you're going to see that this pivot table right here, the second one, is going to automatically be updated for you. Now we can create another pivot table to make another analysis, and it can be, let's say, now we can create the map chart, for example. So to create the map chart, I'm gonna need to use a pivot table. And this pivot table, we need to have, let's say, the states. And I want to compare what are the states that just deliver on time the most, for example. And of course, what is the states that I just have a delay in my delivery the most? Because the way I can make this analysis and see, oh, this state here is not good with the delivery, this one here is good, and then I can improve my logistic chain. In order to do it, to do this pivot table with the states and the delivery on time, yes or no, I need actually here to create another column to help me with this, because as you guys can see, here I can use these two columns, both of these columns here, this last column, column G and column 8, deliver on time and state. But in order to help the pivot table to count which one of these states have, let's say, a deliver on time, yes or no, I need to, instead of using words or strings, text, like yes or no, I instead need to use numbers, for example, to help the pivot table. So whenever, let's say, I got here a no, for example, I can change the no to number 1. That way we can count the unities. So whenever, let's say, the Alaska have here a 1, I know that the deliver on time deliver no. So one time it's occur here in this state. And if it's happen again, it's gonna add another unit, and so on, so on. So that way we can keep adding, let's say, these delays in delivery. So I'm gonna basically need to change the yes to 0 and no to 1. Once you do it, instead of just change this column itself, I'm gonna create another column, because that way we can make it dynamic and we can automate this task. Whenever I change here any value in the column G, my new column is gonna be automatically updated for me. And to do it, we can use the if function. If this value is equal to yes, so input 0. Else, if not, it's gonna be no, okay? So it's gonna input the number 1. Let's create here delivery, let's say. I can give it the name, delivery. Or I can also type it in delays, for example. And then here I can use the equal sign if function. Let me double click here, 1, 2. So if this value that I have here to the left, this is going to be my logical test. If this value right here is equal to yes, but to type it in here yes, I need to quote unquote. I need to put the yes in between quotations mark. Okay, so yes, if it's equal to yes, comma, so type it in 0. Else, comma, if not, type it in 1. Close parentheses and then press enter. Let's check if it works. Let me just came back here to the previous cell, and then I'm gonna double click here to the down right corner of the cell. 1, 2. Okay, now all the rows here contain the same function. And as you guys can see, whenever I have a no, my if function is gonna return the 1 number. And that way we can now using it in the pivot table, because now I can count. Whenever I have a deliver on time, it's gonna be equal to 0. So it's gonna count nothing, basically. But whenever I have here a no, it's gonna add 1 unity to the state where I have this delay, okay? So let me just click here now, insert, pivot tables, existing worksheet, the up arrow, and then I go to pivot table, and I'm gonna just insert this pivot table right here to the column, to the cell G2. Now arrow, okay, and here we got the new pivot table. I'm gonna use here, let's say, the name of the states, that is here. I can click, hold, and drag to the rows. As you guys can see, now I have each one of the states in each one of the rows. I got here a bunch of rows, huh? And as you guys can also see here in the pivot table fields, I ain't got any type of delays. So my new column that I just added before is not here yet. How can I do it? How can I update my data set in order to update the values that I have in my pivot table? You can click in any pivot table that you want, and then you can go to pivot table analyze, and then you can go to refresh this down arrow and refresh all. Okay, now as you guys can see, the delays column is already here. Now I can take this and just release here in the values. Okay, now I have here each one of the delays that occur, the numbers, the sum for each one of the states. I can close it, and we're basically done, guys. This is our 3 pivot tables that we're gonna use to make this dashboard. Of course, you can continue to do analysis from this data set that we have from this table. And if you want to continue to do this analysis and to create more pivot tables, you can do so. It's no problem. But to this video, I'm gonna use these 3 pivot tables to build the chart. And to start with the dashboard, let me just click here in this plus sign to add a new sheet, and then right click, rename. I'm gonna give it a name like dashboard, for example, enter. The first thing that I like to start with is clicking here in the view tab and then write lines. And just read it off, basically the lines that divide the columns to the rows, for example. I like this visual here in the Excel. Another thing that we can do is select here an area of our spreadsheet, a large area, for example, and then we can give it a color. So for example, home tab. In this example right here, I'm gonna use a dark color, for example, this one right here, black text 1, lighter 25%. I'm gonna use it. And with the background, we're basically done, but Here, I think it's important to create the areas where we're gonna input the charts itself because it's easier to create the charts and to adjust the charts here in the screen. So for example, here to the left, I want to input my map chart. So I'm gonna leave here a rectangle to the map chart. And just here below, I want to put it, let's say a column chart. And then here to the right, I want to put a column chart or a bar chart, so we can create these rectangles to just make sure where we're gonna put each one of the charts. So let me click here, insert, illustrations, shapes, and I'm gonna stick with this option right here, rectangle with rounded corners. I can click here, and now I can click, hold, and drag to make the area of the rectangle. I can do like this, for example. I think these corners are too much round, let's say the way. I can click here in this orange circle, click and drag in to make it rounder, or I can drag out to make it sharper. I'm gonna let that way, for example. I think it's good. Now let me just right click here, and then I go to format shape, and here to the left, this right panel, I'm gonna click in line, and I'm gonna use a solid line that is equal to white, for example, and the width, I'm gonna use 1. Yes, okay. Now we can close it. I'm gonna to fill. I'm gonna use a gradient fill. But instead of using the colors that I have here, let me just change the type to radial, for example, and the gradient stops. I'm gonna delete everyone that I can, and I'm gonna stick with these two. This one here, I'm gonna leave it to the left, and then I'm gonna change the color, let's say to red, and this one right here, I'm gonna change the color to yellow. Why I'm doing it? Because I want you to see where the grades are. Okay, so let me click here again in radial direction. I'm gonna click here, and I'm gonna select this one right here from center. Okay, now I know that the red spot is just to the center of the area. So I'm gonna change it to, let's say, instead of using head, now I know that is in the center. I can change it to white, for example, and I can change the transparency to 100%, let's say. Now we can create this effect. And now instead of using this yellow one, I can change it to also to white, but I'm gonna change the transparency to maybe 90% or 85. Let's say, let's see how it does. 85 or 8%. Yes, I think it's good in 8%. Now I'm gonna take this one here to the left and bring it to the position maybe like 40, for example. Yeah, that way I think it's good. Now I can close it, and we're basically done with the first area of the chart. Now I can click Ctrl C and then Ctrl V to copy and paste. And now I can adjust this new area down below here to our second chart that we're gonna do, like this, for example, and make it a little smaller, like this. Now I can again Ctrl C, Ctrl V. Now I can adjust this chart right here, for example, like this. This is gonna be our bar chart where we can compare which one of the states against each other and see who just sold the most, for example. Okay, now we're basically done with these three areas, but you can actually create another area just right here above to input our slicers and the title that you're going to create, but I'm going to leave it that way. I think it's good. Now another thing that I can create here is the title of my dashboard, for example. So I can click here in the insert and here to the left, text box, and I can just type it in here, the dashboard title. So for example, dashboard or sales dashboard, for example. Now I can select everyone here, and then I go to the home tab, centralize here everyone to the middle, to the center, increase a little bit, 20 for example, put it in bold, and change the font to white, for example. Now I can come back here to the shape format, and shape outline I'm going to use no outline, and shape fill, no fill. It's going to be like this, for example. Now we can come back here to the pivot tables and start to create our charts. Let's start with the most difficult one, that is going to be the map chart. It's difficult to create here a map chart using the pivot table because you actually can't do it. So let's click here in this pivot table, and then I go to insert, for example, and then I can select the chart that I'm going to use, like maps, and then this map right here, filled map. You can click here. Now I got an arrow. You can't create this chart type with this data and blah, 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 okay? So we can use a pivot table basically. So how can you do if you can't use a pivot table to create the map chart, how can we do? How can we create the map chart without using the pivot table itself? We can do something like this, for example, equal sign, this cell right here, enter, Control C, and then select everyone here, Control V. Okay, now we're done. So this is the way that I find to create a map chart, not using directing a pivot table, but using let's say a formula, an equal sign to help me. Now I can select everyone right here, select everyone to the end, okay? Now I can come back to the insert tab, and then I can create the map. Okay, here is our map. Maybe it can take a time to load. Okay, it's already here. Let me just right click here, and then I can go to cut, and then I came back to the dashboard, and then I'm gonna click in any cell that I have here, right click, and then paste. Okay, here's our chart. Now I can just adjust the chart in each one of the areas that we have here. But here we have a problem. This chart is pretty much a rectangle in a, let's say, a horizontal way. So maybe it's not just be viewed here in this area, because this area is actually the opposite of the chart. So maybe it's a good idea to change this format that we have here. So let me just make some changes here, and I came back in a couple seconds. Okay guys, so this is the solution that I find. I just take this area here that it was like this, for example, and I stretch a little bit to the right, and I shrink a little bit up, and it's I got this visual here. And this one that was just above, I just increase it to the left, for example. It was maybe like here, for example, and I increase a little here to the left. That way, this is our new design here to the dashboard. Now I can come back here to the pivot table. I can take my map again, or you can take the map, whatever you place it, and then I can right click again, cut, dashboard, and then right click, paste. Okay, that way I'm gonna just take the map and put it right here, just above everyone else, like this, for example. And I need to make sure to put the map just over the area that I have. Only thing that I can do here is click in the chart title and read it off, delete it, because I'm not gonna use it. This pattern that Excel gives me, this standard title. Now I can click here to the series and then delete it. Before we do the change in the layout, in the design, let's create the other charts. So here, let's get back to the pivot table, and I'm gonna use here the second pivot table to create, let's say, the bar charts. So I'm gonna click here in any cell of my pivot table, and then insert, and then I click here in the column charts, but instead I'm gonna use a 2D bar, like this one right here. Right click, cut, came back to the dashboard, right click, and then paste here. Now I'm gonna just adjust the area of the chart just over the area that we have underneath, like this, for example. I think it's good. Something that we can do here is just read it off these gray buttons that we have here. To do it, I can click here in the pivot chart, analyze, view the buttons, and then I can go to hide all. Okay, now I can delete the title. I can delete this legend right here too. I can read it off these grind lines. I can click and delete. And another thing, let's get back here, these values right here. I can click and read it off these values. Okay, now we're basically done with the chart, and I know that here, maybe it's a good idea to sort from the largest value to the smallest one. But here we have the opposite. We have the smallest one to the largest one. Okay, we're gonna solve this problem. We're gonna make some changes here. Now the third chart that we can create here, let's come back to the pivot table, is using the first pivot table that we have, the total sold per month. So I can click here in insert, column chart, and this time, yes, I'm gonna use an actual column chart. So this one right here, right click, cut, dashboard, right click, paste. Okay, now we have our third and last chart. Let me adjust here the area just over the area that we have underneath, like this, for example. I can read it off the title, I can read it off these grind lines, I can read it off the legend, and I can read it off these values here to the left, and I can read it off these gray buttons that we have here. So I can come to pivot chart, analyze, view buttons, hide all. And yeah, we actually done. Don't forget to click here to save our spreadsheet, okay? Now we're pretty much done. Something that we can do yet is create here the slicers. For example, we can have each one of the products in one slice and each one of the years. So maybe here we can create the years, and just here underneath you can create the products, slicers. And we can do it, and our dashboard is gonna be done. And of course, we can change the layout and the design of each one of the charts that we have here. Well, let's start here with the slicers. So we're going to come back to the pivot table, and then I'm going to click in any pivot table that I have here, and then I go to pivot table analyze, and then insert slicer. For a slicer, as slicers, I'm going to use, let's say, the product itself, and I'm going to also want to use the months. So we're going to click here, okay? We're going to use this two slicers. I'm going to click in OK, and our slicers are already here in the screen. Something that I can do here is clicking this in each one of the slices that I have, and then I'm going to press and hold the Control key, and then select here the second one. Right click, cut, and then I come back here to dashboard, right click, and paste. Okay, now we can adjust these slicers in the screen. But before we do it, oh guys, sorry, we are not using months but years. So let me read it off this, and then I'm gonna come back here to the pivot table analyze, insert slicers, and I'm gonna use years instead of using months. Okay, years. Okay, right click, cut, and then I come back to the dashboard and right click here and paste. The months make no sense because look, the chart, we already have the information of each one of the months, for example. So why I want to specify the months? It makes no sense, but the years make sense because each one of the charts have all the informations, the map chart, this column chart, and this bar chart here. And all these charts are include the year 2024, 2025, and 2026. So yeah, it's a good idea to just specify by year in each one of the charts that we have. But by month, maybe it makes no sense, okay? In this scenario right here. Now let's just click here in the area, in the years, slicers, and then I can go to slicer, and I can split it to two columns, for example, or three. Three columns, I think it's good. Now the products, I can click here, and then I can do the same thing, but instead of using three, I'm gonna use two. I think it's good. Now let's say I'm gonna take the years, and I'm gonna put here just over another slicer, like this, for example. And this product slicer, I'm gonna put it here, for example. I'm gonna increase a little to the right. And I'm gonna just up a little like this, for example. I can bring it a little bit down, and this one a little bit down too. Now with this slicer selected, I can right click here, and then I can go slicer settings, display header, no, and then okay. I'm gonna do the same thing for the second slicer here. Right click, slicer settings, display header, no. And one thing that I can do here is clicking slicer and increase a little bit the height. So I can use maybe 0.5, for example, inches. And this first one, I can do the same thing, so 0.5. Okay, I think it's good. Let's check if our slicers are working. So I want you to see the informations based on, let's say, the omega-3. So we're going to click here. And just this bar chart here update for me. The map chart and the column chart did not update. So why this happened? Because we need to connect these two slicers that we have with the three charts. So with the first one, the second one, and the third one, that is already working, but we need to make sure it's connected. So let me right click here in the slicers, and then I can choose report connections. Now I need to select all the pivot tables to make sure I connect my slicers with all the three pivot tables that I have, and that way, because the pivot table is connected with the chart, everything is going to be automatically updated whenever I change and whenever I click in any slicer. And then I'm going to click OK, and as you guys can see, this two charts is automatically updated for me. Here, we have an error in the map chart, but we're going to solve it, okay? But before it, let me right click here in this slicer, the first one, and then I go to slicer settings, and then I go to, oh sorry, it's not a slice settings, it's right click, is report connections, and then I'm going to select everyone else, this one and this one right here, and then okay. Now let's say I want to see the data from 2025 by the product creatine, for example. Yes, as you guys can see now, everything is working, but the chart is not working yet. Let's check why the chart is not working. If I come back here to the pivot table, as you guys can see, we use here a formula that is equal sign the previous cell that we have here. Okay, it's a simple formula, but if you came back here, as you guys can see, instead of now having, let's say, 50 rows, we have here maybe 20 rows because the configuration of the slicers that we select, so 2025 and the creatine product, we don't have here all the states where we have sales for the creatine for 2025. So because of that, we have here a bunch of zeros, and moreover, we also have here this grand total that is not supposed to be here, because the grand total make no sense. Here we have all the states, for example, Texas, Vermont, and so on, but grand total is make no sense. It's not a state. It's just the total of the pivot table itself. So because of that, our chart have this error right here. Let's see if we can make it better. So I'm gonna right click in this pivot table right here, and I'm gonna click here in the pivot table options and totals and filters, grand totals. I'm gonna uncheck this both right here, and then I can click OK. Now let's check if our chart is correct, because now we don't have anymore the grand total right here. Let's get back to the chart, and yeah, it's not correct yet. So let's get back to the pivot table, and let's try to just read it off all the zeros that we have. So we're going to select everyone here, select everyone. I'm going to basically delete. Let's see if it's going to work. Delete it. Again, came back to the dashboard, and yeah, the map is working. So this is what we need to do. But how we can delete the zeros? We can read it off the zeros in a dynamic way, because it's going to be times where you're going to have 20 rows. It's going to be times where you're going to have 15 rows, 30 rows, 35, and so on, so on. So we need to make it dynamic. We can use to do it the if function. So equal sign if function, double click here, 1, 2. So if this value right here is equal to a blank cell, equal to that we have here just down below. So if this cell right here is equal to a blank cell, open and close quotations mark, this is a blank cell, comma, if so, we're gonna use nothing but a blank cell. So open and close parentheses, open and close quotations mark, okay? And then comma. If not, I can use this value itself, enter. Now I can press Ctrl C, select everyone here to the end, and then press Ctrl V. And we're done. Now, whenever I got here, the blank cells, we also have the blank cells into our function. Now it's not a formula anymore, but it's a function. And as you guys can see here, the dashboard, the map chart is already worked for us. So I can now, using the slicers for the years, using the slicers for the product, and everything here is working. We have here this, maybe this message that is appeared, but I can click here and close. Okay, now we're done. Now let's make some changes in the design and in the layout of this map chart. Let's make it better, with a better looking, and I'm gonna do the same thing for the bar chart and for the column chart and for the slicers, of course. But before we do it, let me just bring the sales dashboard a little bit up. For example, I'm using here the keys of my keyboards, okay, the up key, like this, for example. Let me click here in this map chart, right click, and then I can go to format chart area, and here to the left, to fill, I'm gonna use, let's say, no fill, border, no border, for example. Now I can click here within the chart, in the slicers itself, like this, for example. Let me press ESC to select everyone here, and then I can go to fill, or even I can go here to this last option, series color, and I can use, let's say, I can create a color to the minimum and to the maximum value. But here, instead of using for the minimum a head color, as we usually do, I'm gonna do the opposite, because if I have a minimum value, it's because it's good. It's because I have not that much of delays in my delivery. So I'm gonna use a maximum value as a red color, like this, for example, and the minimal, I'm gonna use a yellow one, for example, like this. Or I can even use a green, for example. I think it might look good too, like this, or not. Let's create here sequential three colors, for example, a diverging. So the midpoint is gonna be yellow, and the minimum point, it's gonna be green. Yeah, I think it's kind of look better now. One thing that we can do here that is gonna improve a lot is click here in the shadow effect, and I'm gonna select the first option, for example. I'm gonna change, let's say, the transparency to 30%. I'm gonna change the blur to true, and the distance I'm gonna use 4. Yeah, I think it's good, or I can even use 3, for example. Okay, now let me just came to the fill line, border, solid line, and I'm gonna use the same line as I use in the same color as I use into the background, that is this one right here. And the width, I'm going to stick with 1 maybe, or 0.5, I think it's good. Now I can close it, or I can do something that is going to improve a lot here. Let me change the border to white, for example, and the fill, I'm going to use, let's say, solid fill. And instead of using blue or any type of these colors, I'm going to use the same color as I used to the background, like this, for example. Now our chart is beautiful, it's modern, it's with a modern look. Let me close this panel, and the chart is done, guys. The only thing that we can do here and improve the chart is to create the title, but I think it's good. To create the chart, we can, let's say, click here in the sales dashboard, text box, and then Control C, Control V, and we can use the same layout and everything else. Let me just put it here to the left, make it a little bit smaller, like this, for example. And instead of using the font as the 20 size, I'm going to use maybe 16. I think it's good. And here it's going to be states versus delays, for example. Delivery delays, for example. That way I can increase a little bit to the right, and I think it's good. Now let me click here in the map itself and make the area a little bit smaller, like this. Okay, just put the text a little bit up. Okay, I think now it's good. States versus delivery delays. Now I can go here, let's say, to this column chart. I can double click here, and to the right I can change the gap width to, let's say, 150%, or even to 120. And then I go to effects, shadow. I'm going to select here the first option of shadow. Transparency, I'm going to use 30%. Blur 2, distance also, I'm going to use 4, for example. I'm going to click here in the fill align, solid fill, or gradient fill, and I'm going to use a yellow one, the second option, for example. Let me close it. Borders, I'm going to use for borders a solid line that is equal to white, for example, and I'm going to use a 1 pt, for example. Now I can close it. Another thing that I can do is select the area of the chart, and then I can go to the format, shape outline, no outline, shape fill, no fill. That way, for example, now with the chart selected, I can go to the home tab and put everyone here in bold and with this white color in the text, for example, like this. I think it's good. And another thing that we can do here is select again the chart, go to design, and here to the left, add chart element, data labels, and then outside end, like this, for example. And another thing that we can do is just right click in these values, and I can go to format data label and put it in a currency mode, for example, currency formatting. Let me just close this label options, number, general, I'm going to change to currency, and yes, but decimal places are going to use nothing, 0, enter. Okay, now we can close it, and our chart is done. One thing that we can do is just add the title, for example, but before it, let me click in the area of the chart and make it a little bit smaller, for example, like this. Now I can click here in this title right here above, and then I can Control C, Control V, bring it down, for example, like here, and just type it in here, sales versus, or sales per month, like this, for example. And yeah, I think it's good. Now something that we can do here is this bar chart right here. And for this bar chart, I can use a blue color. I think it's gonna be okay. Let me click here in this chart. I can go to format and shape outline, no outline, shape fill, no fill, like this. And then I can right click in the bars, format data series, for example. Gap width, I can use, let's say, I can use here 120, for example. I think it's good. I can click here in the effects, shadow, I'm gonna stick with the first option, transparency 30%, blur 2, and distance I'm gonna use 4. Now I can go here to the fill line, borders, solid line. I'm gonna stick with a white one, width equal to 1, fill, gradient fill, and I'm gonna stick with a blue color, like this one, for example. or I can even choose another one, like this maybe, or I can stick with this. I'm going to stick with the second option here, I think it's good. I can close it, and we're basically done with this chart, but let's select it again, just the outside area of the chart, and then I can go home, bold, text white, and then design. Here to the left I can click add chart element, data labels, and outside end, or I can also use inside base, for example, like this. I think it's going to be good. Let me just select all these values right here and right click, format data labels, and I'm going to change it to number. I'm going to change general to currency, for example, and I'm going to use decimal places 0, enter. I can close it now, and with the values still select, I can go to the home tab and increase a little bit to maybe 16 or 16. I think it's good, like this, for example. Okay, our chart is good, and I can actually change the colors. So let me select the values, and I'm gonna put into the same color as the background. For example, this one right here. Yeah, now I think it's better. Now let's check if it's good. Yeah, guys, our dashboard is already working, and something that I just realized. Here we have the opposite way. Instead of having the biggest value here above, we have the smallest one. So to make this change, let's right click here in the bar and then format data series. I can click here instead of using series option. I'm gonna click and I'm gonna use vertical category axis. And something that we can do here is click here in the first option, X options, and I'm gonna change like categories in reverse order. Okay, I can close it, and yes, now it's correct. Yeah, guys, now the dashboard is basically done. Something that we can do here yet is change these slicers. So let's change the settings of the slicers to match with the design that we have here in our dashboard. And I almost forgot to just put here the title. So let me select the chart, decrease it a little bit like this, for example. I'm gonna just take this title right here, Control C, Control V, and I'm gonna bring to the right like this. Customers who bought the most, for example. I can use that way and increase a little bit like this to the left. Customers who bought the most. I think it's correct. Okay. Now we have our dashboard. Let's make some changes here in the slicers. Now we can click here in the slicer, and I can use here any type of design that Excel's already given me, but to make it match with the dashboard that we just create, I can customize my own slicer. I already have done one here, that is my new slicer, but if you want to create your own from scratch, this one actually looks good, so I'm gonna keep this design. But if you want to create your own, you can click in the slicer, and then you can go to slicer, now arrow, and then you can create here a new slicer style, for example. So we're gonna click here in new slicer style. You can give it a name, and you can change any option that you have. And as you are editing the options and put new informations, new colors, you can see here in the preview tab that is gonna summarize how your slicers is gonna look like. But if you want to copy the slicers that I just did here before, let me just show to you. I'm gonna right click here in the slicer that I just saved and then modify. And as you guys can see, there's just two options that I change. So the whole slicer format, I just using here for the font, a bold font and a white color, for example. And the fill, I am using here a same color that I'm using in the background. And then this option right here, this third one, select the item with data, format, and I'm using a yellow one, a yellow color in the fill, and in font, I'm using a bold and black color. That's it, simple as that. And then you need to save, okay? And then you can go to slicer again and select the slicer that we just created, like this. And we're done, guys. So this is our dashboard here in Excel. So I really hope this video can help you out. And if you have any questions, any suggestions to the next videos, let me know, comment down below. And I see you tomorrow. As every day has a new video, I see you there.